Governor, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today. Last night in the debate, you did speak to that there does need to be amended, the Safety Act. And you, for the first time, offered, that was a specific change that you would say, yes, I let it be amended, but not ended. Could you be more specific on what you mean by amended?
Well, specifically, as you know, state's attorneys, Republicans, Darren Bailey, have been saying that they would let violent criminals out of jail on January 1 because of their disinformation, misinterpretation, whatever it may be, of the Safety Act. That's not what the Safety Act says. And so we need to make sure they don't let anybody out on January 1 misreading the Safety Act. So let's just write it specifically into the law. That's an amendment that we can do. Another one that we talked about in the post-debate, press conference, they talk about that there are certain kinds of felonies that people are held for awaiting trial that are somehow, you're allowed to let all those folks out. Let's be clear about what the things are that people should be held for.
That seems to be what the state's attorneys are concerned about. If 100 of the 102 had some concerns and now perhaps a dozen have filed suit, that sounds like what they would like to see. And you do have to say, okay, why are they so worried about this then? Is that the reason?
Well, let's just make sure that violent criminals are not easily let out. Judges should be making these decisions based upon what's good for the community, whether someone's going to recidivate, whether someone's going to hurt somebody if they're let out, or they're a flight risk.
And we could guarantee that's going to happen before January 1? Those amendments.
Well, no guarantees. The General Assembly has to pass something. I don't have control of that. But, there is a veto session coming up. So looking forward to addressing these issues during veto session.
All right, the migrants. Florida and Texas, more today. We're up to more than 3,500. Understand that the cost to the state is now $10 million. Should that be a cost that taxpayers are left with, $10 million?
The federal government ought to pick up the tab here, and we have asked for that. We've talked to the White House. The federal delegation representing Illinois has asked to have it included in the budget, a $50 million appropriation specifically to help pay for the costs of the migrants.
But that's, $50 million just for here in Illinois, because obviously they're all over the place.
We may not use all of it, but $50 million would certainly help us if this continues over the next 4-6 months.
And it looks like it will?
We don't know. If the inhumane activity of the governor of Texas continues, then that's what's going to happen. But look, this is a humanitarian endeavor by the state of Illinois. It's the right thing to do. We get immigrants all the time to the state, and we support them. These are legal migrants. They're not illegal. They're not, these are not undocumented. They're documented. The federal government knows they're here. They're awaiting a hearing. And so we're just taking care of them, making sure that they have everything they need, healthcare check, place to live, food, until they're able to get a work visa, or at least, are accepted here as a refugee, and then they can get a work visa.
But there's no guarantee of that $50 million right now.
No guarantee of it right now, but we do have appropriation here in the state of Illinois, again, to manage refugees and immigrants that come to our state. That happens every year.
But it's got to be, $10 million, it's got to be more than what you've usually had to spend.
It is, although we're managing, but that's why we've gone to the federal government. They really do have the resources at the federal government level, and this is a responsibility of theirs, so that's why we're asking.
All right, I'm kind of mixing it up here, but you did pump millions into the primary that in effect got Darren Bailey elected. You've heard this question, but is it ethical for you to pick the opponent you think you have the best chance of beating in the general election?
Look, I was being attacked by all of the Republican candidates in their primary, and I pushed back in ways that I could, and the DGA similarly was pushing back. The messages were the same messages that I'm saying now. Darren Bailey's too extreme for Illinois. That's what we were saying, what the DGA was saying back in the primary. And, and I was pushing back on Richard Irvin as well during the primary. So, look, it's appropriate for a Democratic governor who's being attacked by all the Republicans to push back on the Republican attacks.
What do you make of, in recent polls, and even recently this week, the Illinois Broadcasters Association, which does have a big, comfortable lead, but you have spent a fortune on this campaign and on the one before when you ran the first time. What about your favorability rating? It still is not above 50 in the Illinois Broadcasters Association. It's not bad. It's 45.9. A lot of people would like that, certainly better than Darren Bailey's. But does that favorability, it does seem as if there are still sort of those questioning whether or not they like you.
My approval rating is much higher than that, first of all. Second of all, look, $100 million and more has been spent attacking me. It has to have an effect out there on the public while they're doing that. And it's a tough campaign, right? Battle back and forth. I'm certainly telling people what I think of Darren Bailey, what I think they should know about Darren Bailey. That's one of the reasons that his favorability is low. His positions are bad for the people of Illinois. But they're attacking me with $100 million. It's going to have an effect.
Well, and you've been able to respond with $100 million of your own.
Yes, but the point is, it's not like we're massively outspending Republicans. We're going head to head with them.
And at the same time, does that give you pause as the election gets closer that people might stay away from voting? How do you rally the troops if they're not, if the IBA poll isn't anywhere near close, if they're not all in?
Look, we were winning in 2018 as well, and by a pretty good margin. We run a great field operation all across the state, and that's how we get voters to the polls. But I think people are very motivated this year. Their abortion rights are on the line. People's voting rights are on the line. They understand that there's a lot at stake in this election, and I think people are going to show up.
There are also those that say crime and inflation, that crime outweighs. Yeah. I don't know if outweighs is the right way to put it, but is abortion as important as the public safety issue for some? And therefore they're going to say to you, okay, you've been the governor, the city and other parts of the state haven't seen as safe a streets as they had seen before. And I know you're going to blame the pandemic, but what about that? Could crime and inflation outweigh abortion?
Well, let's be clear that people are going to vote for me on the issue of the economy as well. There are challenges in the economy, but we're addressing them. People understand that there are some things that are out of the control of politicians. Global inflation. There's 10% inflation in Europe. We're experiencing inflation here. It's less than that. But there's inflation all over the world. And we're dealing with that $1.8 billion of gas, grocery, property, and income tax relief. That has an effect. Sending hundreds of dollars to families across the state allows them to at least ameliorate some of the effects of
Some of those are
inflation.
temporary. Would you extend those?
I would like to, in fact. But what I've said all along is you got to balance the budget and run a surplus in order for us to provide that kind of tax relief, which I've been doing. That's why we're able to do it. Let's keep doing it. It's something I think we're good at. We're Democrats are the party of fiscal responsibility. We're the ones who are providing that relief. We proposed it and got it done. But having a surplus has allowed us to do that. And it's Democrats that have balanced the budget, not the Republicans.
Okay, for the 35th time, you did sign Illinois disaster so that the state does get federal COVID funds. There are those who criticize and say it is because of that federal spending is why we are in the state that we're in of inflation. Is it time to end the COVID disaster executive orders?
Well, there is a federal emergency disaster declaration, just to be clear. We are following that emergency declaration. The reason is because we have people who are poor who live in our state who are getting some advantage from the federal government, SNAP, TANF, and other programs that help them. Low-income folks suffered the most from COVID, both financially and health-wise. And so we've got to continue to stand up for them. We have ratcheted down the emergency declaration in the state of Illinois over the last year, and we're down to just some bare minimum areas. You saw that we're no longer requiring masks in certain areas that we used to.
Other states have
really
given it up,
down
though.
Yeah, but that's because they gave up taking dollars for low-income families across their states. A lot of those are Republican states.
What about the Chicago mayor election? Do you believe that you might support Mayor Lightfoot?
I'm not getting involved in the mayoral election. I'm focused on my own. We've got 3 weeks left until the election here for governor. And, just it's enough to focus on who's going to win in the governor's race and all across the constitutional offices and up and down the ticket.
Post November 8th, might you? You are a Chicago resident.
I am a Chicago resident. Yeah, I mean, obviously I have to make a decision about who I'll vote for, but I don't intend to get involved at the moment. We'll have to see.
Yes or no? If President Biden decides not to run, might you reconsider and get into the White House race?
I'm planning to serve out 4 years as governor of Illinois. We have a lot of challenges in Illinois. We've overcome a number of them already, but it's going to take 4 years, I think, for us to really get through a whole big bunch of the remaining challenges.
And if President Biden decides not to run?
That's what I said.
But you still say you would not be interested?
Yeah, my plan is to focus on being governor of Illinois. I love the state. I love the job that I have. Right now, no intention to change that.
Back to the pandemic. There could be another pandemic. It could be as severe as the one we have had. What have you learned? Is there anything that you would change as far as Illinois' response? Was everything, as you look back and reassess, do you say, we did the right thing, everything?
You couldn't possibly say that, though, just the way you asked that question. I mean, look, when you're in an emergency, and remember the early days of the pandemic, we didn't know what this was. We didn't know how fast it was spreading. We didn't know how fast it would kill people. We didn't have any treatments, no vaccines. So we had to listen to the doctors and the experts, and we did that. And as a result, Illinois has one of the highest vaccination rates in the Midwest, one of the lowest mortality rates in the Midwest. So I'm proud of what we've accomplished during this terrible crisis. Everybody went through this, but Illinois families did the right thing. They masked up when we needed to. They kept their distance when we needed to, and we got through the worst parts of the pandemic.
All right, you do use a private plane, and there evidence is mounting that private planes and private air travel does increase harm to the environment. Should you consider a different mode of travel than using a private plane?
Well, I buy environmental offsets because I think that's appropriate, which helps us
Explain that. I don't know what that means.
Sorry, that means that, you spend money basically to help offset the effect of it by, promoting other environmental causes so that we're cleaning up the environment in some ways. And carbon neutral is essentially the idea of carbon offsets. So, there are lots of ways to travel, and sometimes I travel by private plane, sometimes I travel by commercial flight. I think we're not going to get rid of flying in the United States, but we are starting to see, interestingly, more environmentally friendly ways to do that, because I don't know if you've heard, but there are electric planes being developed right now, and I'm kind of excited about that.
I don't know. I think I'd be nervous. I don't know.
Well, we're at 1871, right, where things get invented.
Right.
And so I'm excited about the idea that there's something new that really could make a huge difference in lowering fossil fuel emissions.
All right, let's talk about equity in the cannabis licenses. First of all, the Charles Thomas ad. He's had several. I kind of wanted to stay away from him, but I feel like I have to talk about it. The one ad says you should be punished. What do you make of that?
I don't know. This is a Dan Proft right-wing effort to attack me. I don't know. I can't speak to what they're thinking when they put these ads on. They're kind of inane right-wing talking points.
But punished is a tough one. That's are you asking someone to threaten you? I don't know. I think it crosses the line.
I can't speak to it. I can just say that almost every ad, almost everything that Dan Proft and his folks that are supporting Darren Bailey claims, he doesn't know anything about it. But the reality is that they've been putting out messages that are really terrible. Some of them are racist. They have tinges of racism throughout them. And, in this case, I don't know, it's just some other attack on me. I think it appeals, frankly, to Darren Bailey's base, which I think is relatively small, and certainly doesn't appeal to most people in the state.
But about those, they raise a point on the cannabis licenses and the equity. Just in October, Rockford did get a majority Black-owned cannabis license. What has taken so long?
It's all the court cases that have been brought up over the last 2 years. At first, it was COVID. Remember, the original licenses were going to be awarded in May of 2020. Well, you know what happened in March of 2020, and that was the beginning of COVID. So it really slowed everything up. So those licenses weren't really granted until the fall, early winter of 2020. And it was all done remotely, made it more difficult. Then there were people who sued because they didn't get a license and they felt like they should. They went to court. There are other people who sued, got a license, didn't feel like that they were given all the opportunity that they should be given. And I understand the court system had to go through those cases, make decisions. 2 years later, finally, this last summer, those cases were resolved. So now hundreds of licenses have been granted. And that is part of the equity program. We've made sure that we haven't granted a whole bunch of other licenses. Well, again, we've limited the number of licenses that have been given out because we wanted to make sure that there was real equity in this industry. So for example, look at Michigan, look at Colorado. They gave out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of licenses to anybody that wanted to open a dispensary. The result is no equity. Literally 99% of the dispensaries are owned by white owners, and there's nobody who suffered the ill effects of the war on drugs, or come from places that have been left out and left behind, who own those dispensaries. Here in Illinois, we're making sure that they do.